For generations, Australian agriculture has been central to Australia's prosperity. It's our vision that it remains this way into the future. We know that the smartest and most innovative farmers are the ones that are actively engaged in business planning, using professional services to complement their operations at the right time. We are here to share the stories of some of the farmers that have used these services, and we will uncover the different ways farmers are building better businesses. Hi there, and welcome to the Smart Farm Business Webinar Series. My name is Gillian Kilby, and I'm coming to you live from the Exchange in Dubbo. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Wiradjuri people, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I'd like to extend that respect to any Indigenous people joining us online today, and encourage you to drop into the chat what traditional land you might be joining from, wherever you might be. You can also use the chat today to ask questions, and those questions will be about succession planning, because today we're here to discuss the topic of succession planning as a part of business planning, and we're joined by two industry experts who are the owner and manager of Proactive, Australia's leading succession planning company. Isobel and Jess have both come from farming families, been a part of succession planning. They have business and law backgrounds. There is no one more qualified to sit here today and talk to you about this topic. So Isobel and Jess, thank you so much for joining us here in Dubbo. Isobel, you've led the process of unpacking succession planning in Australia for over 2 decades. Why does succession planning mean so much to you?
I think it stems mostly from my own love of agriculture. It's driven also by what I've seen so much of, which is what happens when it's not addressed. And I think that when it is addressed, we see that continuity of Australian farming family businesses. We see farming families remaining on the land. They are the very best stewards of our land, which is terribly important. And I think more broadly, when it's done well, it really has a beautiful ripple effect in our agricultural communities and agriculture more generally. So without it being done, it's a great loss to agriculture. So, and I think it's so exciting because it just sees that reinvigoration of the next generation coming in. It's wonderful to see. That's exciting.
Isobel, I remember you telling a story of being a young person entering into a farming family and driving the lawnmower around, doing laps and drafting these conversations in your head with your mother-in-law, with your father-in-law, with family members, and how much negative energy that must have created. How exciting is it for you to see the next generation looking at a succession planning process that might actually put that energy into positive things?
It's headspace that's not used in the best way. And so when people are given a chance to have the clarity that they need, then they can actually really focus on the things that matter and do that in a positive way, absolutely. And there'll be so many more benefits to that than riding around having weird conversations in your head.
Jess, you approach succession planning as the next generation. You're also a very experienced facilitator of this succession planning process. How does your generation's views of succession planning differ from Isobel's generation?
Yeah, it's a good question, Jill. I spend most of my days on the phone with younger farmers, so farmers from my generation, and what they really want is clarity. They want to know what the future looks like. They want to know when they can renovate their kitchens. They want to know how they're going to educate their children. They want to know what mum and dad's future plan looks like. How are we going to pay for it? Are we going to have to fund off-farm children that aren't going to benefit from the fruits of the business itself? Isobel's conversation with herself on the mower, I feel like those conversations are happening in most families, and it's generally not ill-intentioned. It's just that in lieu of a succession planning platform, people don't have the appropriate platform to have tough conversations or to be able to voice their perspective. So I think that's exactly what young people want. They want to know what everybody wants for the future so that they know what their own lives are going to look like.
And Isobel, Jess has spoken about the clarity that the next generation want moving into business. What does the older generation want coming out of business at the other end?
I think they need to feel a sense of having achieved something that is in safe hands. And I think sometimes there's a lot of nervousness around how safe that is. They also want to be fair to all of their children, so they understand that while it mightn't be possible to treat everyone equally, there has to be something agreed that's going to work. And for themselves, they need security. And that can be different for mums and dads. And they've got to have a purposeful life, regardless of what stage they're at.
I think that one other thing that we hear a lot is that, and potentially one of the blockages to succession, is mums and dads feeling like things aren't quite done how they wanted to finish them before they handed over. And I guess my message in that field is that it doesn't have to be a finite period of when one person's timeline ends and another begins. And often the overlap is what helps to create that finish to whatever the task that mum and dad set out to. One of the things we hear is, I just want to get that exclusion fence finished because that really signifies what it was before to what it is now. So my message in that is, like, try and do it together. And a succession process is a perfect way to establish that platform to move together to finish those goals.
So they're trying to get parts of their business to a stable point before they bring in the next generation. So then what's the difference between business planning and succession planning and estate planning and having a will if they just want to finish one more job on their list before they start a planning process? What's the difference?
Yeah, it's a good question, Jill. I think that when you're looking at it from a bird's eye view, it all kind of looks the same, but where you get clarity is when you're on the ground. So most businesses, well, all businesses, I would say, whether they have it written down or not, do have a business plan. And the business plan details the things that you'd like to happen and what the capital requirement is for those things. So succession is not different to that, in that another arm of business planning is succession planning. So once you're clear on what your succession planning outcomes are to be, that implicates the business plan, because we say, well, these are the things we need to achieve for succession to have occurred, and this is how it's going to implicate the way we run our business. So if we need to be able to purchase something for mum and dad to live at if they're choosing not to live on the farm forever, that's going to have a capital requirement, and we need to make sure the capital is being allocated in that way to achieve that outcome. So it's no different to getting a new set of cattle yards or the landing pad or whatever it is that's next on the CapEx plan. It's just another thing that gets built in, but very distinct, because the timeline means that one generation is going to see its way out of the business and another take more responsibility coming in.
When I was growing up on a farm, I think the cattle yards took priority over the kitchen renovation, which took priority over the succession plan.
Absolutely.
I think a business plan will never be effective if the succession plan isn't clear, because it does require capital, and it's very easy to get caught up in the gold-plated cattle yards and the latest in technology per se that absorbs capital, and not prioritising, for example, provisioning for the incumbent generation that are handing on to the next generation, for example. So I think it's really easy to get carried away, and the passage of time is lost. And I think that's where families can feel a sense of panic sometimes. It's important to start early when we're talking about those things.
Well, when you think about starting this process, what % of businesses out there, farming businesses, do you think have a business plan and a succession plan? And do you think it's something that farming families can do on their own?
I think that there are more families with a business plan and less families with a succession plan. Be probably lucky to be 1 in 4 that have an adequate succession plan. And I think it's important that they interlock so that one makes sense with the other. I think it's something that families, are challenged by and leave it too late. So, yeah.
And do you think families can do this business planning and succession planning process On their
Oh,
own?
on their own, yes, I missed that bit. I think it's very difficult to do it all on our own because we're, you know, in my case, for example, my husband died unexpectedly. And so we're having to address with more urgency a lot of the questions that most people would be addressing. And our own experience of that is, you know, we're feeling, as mum, I'm feeling the pressure of all the decisions that have to be made, trying to second guess what he might have thought. And if I had to corral everybody and ask all the questions and really manage the process, it would be exhausting. It is fantastic to have external people come in and they take the responsibility of managing that process away from you so that I can just sit at the table and be mum with my family. And there's so much value in that. And the blind spots we have in our own families versus when we're external to another family's process. We don't know our blind spots. And when we have facilitators, we become aware of those. And so that means that we're doing a thorough job of making decisions and planning rather than without some of the vision that we would not have without facilitators.
I think another point in that is it is really challenging to be able to adequately represent your own perspective and that of the family you've built. So in my family, if I was to sit down and have a conversation with my parents and my siblings, I would be doing so representing the perspective of myself and my husband and the life that we've built, as well as trying to play the role of being a sibling and a daughter. So it is really challenging to do that and share those really integral parts of the lives that we've built with our siblings and with our parents, because often our perspective in sharing that honestly means we can't give the weight to understanding someone else's that we would like to. So having external help means that everybody's voice can be heard equally, and that gives way for outcomes to be decided based on understanding those collective perspectives rather than one versus another. And I guess like one of the things that we like to help families to choose is the feast over the fight. So everything we say and how we deliver it is about being able to sit together and have a meal over Christmas rather than being a for sale sign going up because we couldn't sort this out. So the external facilitation is very valuable in that space.
I'm so grateful that you've both shared your personal stories because you're both succession planning experts and you have your own farming families that you are embarking on a succession planning journey with at different stages of your life, but both requiring external support. Can I just ask a side question? Like, is it easier for you because you're experts?
Absolutely not.
No, I would definitely say.
I would say no, not at all. It's
human
tough.
emotions.
It's hard, you know, and I think that's why this is such privilege. It's a privileged work is because, you know, we understand that the gravity of it and how important it is and you know, what a courageous undertaking for families and particularly business owners who really sit themselves down to an amazing amount of vulnerability to actually work their way through something that'll work for everyone. And it starts with a lot of vulnerability. There's no question. It doesn't matter who we are. That's not easy.
No, exactly. I do think while it's not easier for us having hindsight into what it can look like if somebody isn't able to listen to their family members, isn't able to take on board those perspectives. I think that is always lingering in my mind because I would never want to be in a space where I couldn't really hear what was important to my family. So I suppose there is one little tiny advantage there is if you've seen it gone bad, you know you don't want to replicate it.
No.
It is courageous work that you do, and I love that you see it as a privilege to sit with and sit beside a family going through the process, and that we acknowledge succession planning is a really important part of business planning. It's not something we sit to the side to do once every 60 years or when someone gets ill or when someone unexpectedly passes away. We had the privilege of meeting some of your clients in the last 2 weeks, and we went and met with the White family in Mudgee. We're going to hear about their journey to bring an external facilitator into their family after 3 years of what they call butting heads.
We are about 20 k's east of Mudgee on a property called Havilah North. We are a seed stock Angus stud cattle operation and also run some commercial cattle alongside that with a handful of sheep as well.
So we work with Jack and myself and Jack's younger brother Harry and his wife Bobby. We're sort of in that phase of life where trying to grow a business and a family at the same time. So it's busy but fun. The succession planning, I think, was probably brought about by a few different factors.
Dad was definitely ready for us to come home. We internally tried to construct a 5-year transition plan where by the end of the 5 years we would be sort of trusted enough to take the business on, and then Dad would be set up enough to be sustainable on his own. By the end of about the 3rd year, having put forward a few proposals to them, we just kept butting heads and we just kept going round and round in circles. And so we realised that a third-party mediator was probably going to be our best way forward.
We quickly realised that it was difficult and that there were a lot of factors that we needed assistance with. There's the legal side of things, there's the accounting side of things, there's the bank, and there's a lot of different stakeholders that need to be managed. So bringing all of those people together is a really difficult thing to do, and I think it's something that you need experience in doing, and that's certainly where we valued greatly the help of that third-party succession planning business.
I remember it being quite traumatic at times. I think you go through a few like emotional stages where you kind of thrash out how everyone actually feels about everything, and that all comes out at some point. I personally do think, that succession planning should be kind of factored into business planning the whole way through. It's almost like a bit of a contingency measure if things go bad earlier than you think as well, that you've sort of got a plan B. We definitely wouldn't be where we are today, for sure. I remember Isobel literally asked Dad what he wanted in front of a whole table of people after like the second day of the workshop, and he actually just had to say it, and then that was it. Like, that was, once we knew what he wanted, then we made it happen.
I think as someone who, coming into this family succession planning as the in-law, I think it's really important that you're involved, if that's what everyone is happy with. And certainly Proactive had the foresight with us to say, we were in a situation where one couple were married and the other weren't, but they know everyone's at the table, and that might feel scary, but it's really important because at the end of the day the outcome is ours, and if you're not there, then you don't have a say. This is, I think, one of the best things they left us with was almost setting your business structure in a way that operates to avoid communication breakdowns. Something as simple as having a 10-minute meeting every Monday morning, a quarterly check-in where everyone's at the table and you're talking about strategy, so that there are key moments throughout the year when things that might be a niggle have room to get spoken about and don't just build up and become a bigger issue than they should be. I actually do think that's a really key benefit of doing it. As hard as it feels at the time, it's worth it. We've got certainty around what assets we own, what parts of the business we own, what we run, what's in our control and what's not. And that's been really reassuring, but also really exciting, because I think once you've got that clarity, then you've got the space to really get into it.
We just saw how the White family were able to implement a business process into what is a very tight family farming operation. The weekly meeting, the quarterly meeting. I'm really keen to understand how this process enables families to manage emotions and different personalities. Isobel.
I think adding some structure into our communication and our decision-making processes is really important, and that's what they're referencing there. If we don't we need to see structure as our friend, and we've had largely unstructured decision-making processes in families traditionally. So with a little bit of structure, it gives us the appropriate platform to discuss appropriately the different types of, discuss the topics and decisions. It also gives us the opportunity to talk about any concerns we might have, so that we're appropriately getting off the carousel all of those little things that can become big things if we don't deal with them regularly. And it also allows us to separate family from business, because these people are working together and living together. And so being able to enjoy family gatherings and knowing that there's actually an appropriate forum for business and farm discussions. And I learnt that from my mother-in-law, actually, because she used to love to have Sunday lunch, and she would ban anyone from talking about the farm. I don't want to talk about the farm. We talk about that every other day of the week. So I think that's really what's important in giving that structure.
Isn't it interesting? Here at the Exchange, we see so many businesses come through engaging in the weekly meeting. The construction businesses have daily toolbox talks. There's monthly check-ins. There's team offsites. And here we are faced with farming businesses operating totally different without that structure. Do you have any theory as to why that would be?
Well, you can overdo it, of course. You can see some corporate settings where you think, oh, I'm meetinged out.
Yeah.
So it is about having something that's appropriate. I think farming families haven't traditionally done it, so it's not blueprinted into their DNA. A lot of businesses in their origins were just mum and dad who just managed to work it out over the kitchen table. It's as we grow and bring more people into our businesses, whether they're family or not, that we really need to implement this to support our communication. And unless you've seen it done well somewhere, sometimes it doesn't occur to people that it's actually going to be useful to them. And those doing people who are farmers, they hate sitting around and talking. Well, they don't mind a bit of talking, but it's not their most natural mode of operandum. So it's a discipline to implement that structure to support our communication and our decision making.
They're so focused on the doing, the
Very
productivity.
much. Well, they love what they do.
Yeah.
I think another thing we're seeing is that as the next generation come home, and a lot of them have worked off farm and had formal training where they can see how it operates, how it actually works to have communication platforms and regular check-ins, and how the implications of that in their other role before they've come home. So if we're looking at a mum and dad family business and all of a sudden a daughter or a son comes home with their partner, we've doubled the size of the business overnight, which means we need double the amount of communication. It's not as simple as lying in bed at night and having a quick chat with your wife or your husband to say, oh, this is what I did today, and could you run that errand for me tomorrow? All of a sudden, we've got 2 more people to inform about the running of the day or the week or the month. So usually the need for communication comes with growth in the business, as Isobel said, and also that lends itself to understanding the different personality types within a family, because mum and dad are well adapted to dealing with each other, but that doesn't mean having 2 or so more people in the business means that our communication style extends to them also.
You've raised some really interesting issues and dynamics about when the family gets more complex, when there's employees, when there's people returning home. We travelled up to a property near Goulburn, and we met with the Beck family, and we spoke to the Beck family about how they tackled the succession planning process as part of a business planning process, because they have quite a large diversified business, on farm and off farm children. Let's take a look.
Our enterprise is a farming operation of sheep and cattle, and then overlaying all of that, we have a poultry bedding business. That's been running for about 30 years, and it's based here at Murray's Flats, north of Goulburn. We employ about 16 people in the business, which includes my son, Tim.
Anthony was sick in 2014 and took 12 months off work. We didn't think he would go back to work. I then got sick in 2015 and ended up taking a redundancy from TAFE. With a leap of faith, put the redundancy and my super into the business. Timothy was still living at home here. Our girls both live in Wagga. They felt that there was a team A and a team B developing. Timothy thought that we could keep it all in-house and sort it out ourselves. I ended up saying to Timothy, this initial stage is not negotiable. For my reasons, I need to make this phone call. And that was about where our family was, and it was also from my family experience. Had we done things differently in my own family, my siblings and parents, some outcomes may have been a little different.
I was sort of against it in the initial phase, just the expense, and takes a bit of time to be honest about it. What we've got out of it has actually turned out to be quite a good investment. I understand the system better, which is I'm more comfortable with. And I think the kids have got a lot more out of it, so they understand the system as well. I can't just make a decision like I used to. Now I have to go through this whole system, which is a lot better for everyone.
Most definitely when we started the process, it was definitely about what do you have for retirement? You need X, Y, Z.
We talk about things a lot more, and that's probably some of the basis of why it actually has improved. To make this thing work, it has to be quite forensic. That initial having to do that was quite intrusive. When I look at it now, I don't know why I actually did feel like that. The value, you can look back now and see the value, no doubt about it.
Timothy, I would say, until doing what we're doing now, he was just about the doing of the job side of it, but it's brought Timothy much more into the business decision side of it. I liken this process to firming up the base of the triangle. It sits in the same category as our accountant and our administration. Each of those people has a piece of the puzzle to offer. To tell you the truth, it's been Proactive that brought us to the realisation that we have got something to success. And we never thought of that before.
If you actually don't ask them, and when something happens dramatic, well, it actually all comes out that I was just told that's what it was. Now we're at a stage where that decisions that we are making now can be reviewed, look back every 12 months or every 6 months, whatever we need, so that everyone's still comfortable. This has really given us that space to talk about that for the long term, and that's been really cathartic, and it's been really wholesome, and it's been really honest. So I think that's the thing that's really made the difference, and they can actually see that we can probably look after ourselves in the future, and that, and one of the spin-offs might be that we can look after them as well.
I think the value we've had out of this, I honestly, and the children know what we've had out of this would absolutely be more than worthwhile, because we've got children that are, and parents who are all actively engaged, and we're still moving forward.
The kids can see that with our farming enterprise and this business, it's actually not a funny thing to even think that potentially it could just go indefinitely. It doesn't really matter, because really that would be a great outcome. And succession planning, without a shadow of a doubt, is going to enable that. So, and without that, I don't think we actually had a future.
So the Beck family saw a lot of value in the process, but they did have to get over the initial hurdle of cost. Jess, what is the real value of entering into this succession planning process?
Yeah, this is a conversation I have a lot, because cost can feel prohibitive when you're engaging in a succession process, and a lot of the time the real value is felt at the conclusion of the process, so it can be a challenging one to get your head around. I think that if you look back on your life's work, particularly as mum and dads who often took over a business and have grown it exponentially throughout your lives, and if you think about all of the things that you've done for your children, to me that's what's at stake by not engaging in a process where you have family relationships that you need to value, you have the business production itself, you have the land on which the business runs, which for most of us has doubled or tripled in the last 3 or 4 years. You have health and well-being, and just the ability to have good relationships with your family. To me, all of those things are at stake, and the value that is exhibited in engaging in a process is really by finding an outcome that all family members can live with. There is so much value in that.
I just remember Fran, in the process of interviewing her, she had tears in her eyes, and she says, we have a family that have good relationships now. And she also said, I'm making that phone call to her son. She said, this is not negotiable. So for the mums out there who are not going to negotiate with their children, they are going to make the phone call and do something about succession planning. What is the process that they can expect to go through?
Yeah, so it is it is a multifaceted process where we spend a lot of time getting to know each family member and getting to know the business itself before we have time together for a couple of days. Our process, the link to our process is in the chat now, so you're able to look it up. And there's also information about how to find our website and our 1300 number if you'd like more information.
Yes, so much of the work is actually done in preparing a family for decision making. So it means we've got to know and understand ourselves well as family members. And so there's a lot of work in that and work that individuals need to do. And no two families are the same. The preparation that's required for one may be different for another. And whatever's required is really necessary so that they're well and truly able to step into their own voice. They can speak about their own goals and aspirations, their concerns. Mums and dads can actually step into their own power and speak selfishly for themselves, which they're not usually very good at. So it's really so much about preparation, that's for sure.
It was lovely to see Fran speak about how her son went from doing the doing on the farm to actually being part of the business process. And the dad saying that, oh, I now can't just do things on my own. I have to follow a system.
Yeah.
So what's the benefit for us having this next generation involved?
Oh, my goodness. The energy that comes in the door with that next generation, just when the incumbent generation of, you know, they're getting to a point where they're feeling a bit more tired, even if they're not owning up to it, and had a bit of a flogging with a few things over, you know, during a lifetime. And then to see that energy come in and the enthusiasm and also the creativity of that next generation. Mostly the solutions for families around the challenges associated with businesses and succession planning, the solutions normally come from that next generation who are just willing to throw things out there, and they've seen lots of other things, and they're just so engaged, and they are just an absolute gift to agriculture. There's no question.
If we can channel their energy into the right part of the business, because they're through the succession planning process rather than having their energy focused on the what ifs and the conversations they're drafting in their head to have with their parents.
Yes.
Isobel, we heard Anthony say that he came to the realisation that this business planning process, this succession plan, was actually part of his retirement plan. What are the dangers of families and the older generation sitting down and saying, well, this will just be part of my estate plan. I will put it in a will.
There's a lot of dangers associated with that. For example, to retire well or to plan well, we need lead time. We've got to give our businesses time to deliver outcomes. We've got to prepare ourselves. We've got to transition. You know, it's not, it just doesn't happen like that. We have to have that ability to bring the next generation in and know that the business is in safe hands, and then to be able to let go graciously. And that just doesn't happen in an instant. And I think if we leave things to a will, we are banking on a lot of things suddenly happening at the moment something happens to someone. And that the untimeliness of that and not knowing when that is and leaving everything to that moment in time means that we might be saying in a will, we'd like to deliver X outcome right at a time where we've maybe just bought the neighbour's place. And so really what the estate plan's doing is putting a for sale sign on the front gate. So we need a business plan and a succession plan and an estate plan that all interlock and make sense. And so that those outcomes we want ultimately for our estate are maybe delivered over time as a result of our business plan, not just as a result of someone's untimely death.
One more thing I'd like to add there is that engaging in a succession process gives everybody in the family a seat at the table to help design the outcomes that can be delivered by the family. So quite often I feel like what I hear a lot is that the misconception that farming children, so children that choose to be farmers, are going to have the overwhelming benefit to mum and dad's estate. And one of the things that we can help families to do is to create some outcomes or some possibilities or options for those children that won't be farmers or are choosing to not be farmers, so that they can feel like they were as valued and as important to mum and dad as the farmers, and that mum and dad have the opportunity to then watch them excel in their chosen field. So having a place at the table so that everything isn't left for a will is so important to make everybody feel as valued as every other member of the family.
I've just had a question come in on the chat, and I think it's really relevant to what you're talking about, because you're talking about other people's experience, and they've just asked, as succession experts, is there something that surprised you about going through this experience yourself?
Lots of things.
There's a lot of things, yes. I think the biggest surprise probably for me has been seeing how much my children have stepped up.
Oh, wow.
Because they have more clarity, and it's much more transparent. They know what's going on. They know how things are structured, what we've got to achieve. So there's much more of an ability to actually step up with that kind of clarity. And I think probably that for me would be the significant difference that I have experienced.
They have a clear understanding of the direction of the business and where they have autonomy to operate within that business plan.
And absolute clarity about if something happened to me, because I'm their last parent now, if something suddenly happened to me, they know exactly how that's going to pan out. So there won't be any nasty surprises for anybody.
How long did it take you, Isobel, to go through this process you're going through?
Well, we started actually having family meetings years ago, just starting to get them used to that forum, and a stranger coming into the midst, you know, they'd roll their eyes and groan and carry on and what have you. But it's interesting as a parent to see that penny dropping on various points along the way, and you can't know when that's going to be. Giving them that bit of background training, I think, then set us up much better for, you know, when we were in a situation where it was vitally important that we start to make some decisions.
I don't want to pry, but I do want to pry. How often do these meetings happen? You had an external person come and run them. What sort of things are on the agenda in your family meetings, you know, 10 years ago and versus now?
Well, 10 years ago, it would have been things around growing the business, provisioning for our retirement, educating the kids, thinking about what might be and what we could maybe do if there were opportunities that we could give them. Now it's much more about, you know, what do they want? What's the benefit specifically for them from the business? Because we'd done some of the legwork for ourselves, then the business is much more for them. So them taking ownership and them taking over control and them making the decisions. So it's much more about that benefit for them now. And I get a lot of joy in seeing what those possibilities are. And it's still a bit of a work in progress. As I said earlier, it doesn't happen overnight.
And it's not a one and done. It's an ongoing part of your business. Right.
And it can, you know, you can go on a bit of a journey that looks like this sometimes. There's nothing wrong with that either.
I have another question that's come in. Well, actually, Jess, what surprised you about the process? And then I'll ask the second question.
Yeah, it's interesting, because what surprised me about succession in my own family environment is something that I actually see in every family, but when you're sitting there in the chair, it looks entirely different. So one of our facilitators, Steve, says that every family is like a prism where you have different facets to the prism and you're only seeing through your side of the prism. But then in succession, what we're doing is we're turning the prism around and we're expecting you to look at it through a different prism, because we're hearing from family members their perspective, which is representing a different side of the prism. So actually seeing that of my family is different than I expected it to look, even though I knew that would come. But it's really interesting seeing how that's altered my side of the prism. You know, hearing things has altered how I feel about things, and therefore my perspective has changed.
Even just to be able to hear the other person's perspective must take time to develop that listening skill.
Absolutely. Listening is integral to succession, and also truly wanting to understand, like having a true need to understand what is getting everybody else out of bed, what's your goal, how can this business help you get there. That is such a valuable part of succession, and it's very rewarding, both in my own family and as a facilitator in a family process. Watching that become the reason that outcomes are developed. It's amazing watching families build these outcomes based on what they've heard of each other. It's truly amazing.
I've got a question here that's come in. My father had an accident several years ago. Overnight, he and mum were taken out of the business to support him, and at 25, I overtook the daily operations of the business immediately. We're now several years down the track and Dad is back in the business. We haven't discussed succession. How do I start with the chat to begin the next stage of our journey?
There's no
Not an
magic
easy one.
wand to that. I think it's really important that everybody educate themselves around what succession truly is. And particularly probably my generation and older, they don't really understand the full breadth of what it entails, and often have negative connotations. And so that's a real barrier to any conversation. I think a lot of people think it's about giving them a use-by date, so, off to the coast to die, without thinking, well, it's still about us having a purposeful life. It's us really thinking about what we want our legacy to be. And if our legacy truly is the farm, then we have to once again roll our sleeves up and do our last hard job, and that's to get this clear.
I would say that the fear of succession, the fear of engaging in a process is far greater than actually sitting in the chair yourself. It's what farmers tell us keep them awake at night, is the fear of engaging in a succession process.
It's fear of starting.
Fear of starting, fear of being vulnerable, fear of putting themselves first, because what mum and dad need to accept in a succession process is that their timeline is shorter, therefore their priorities are of greater importance. So being able to, for the first time since becoming parents, often say, we are number one, mum and I, or dad and I are number one, and you guys can wait your turn. That's very challenging for parents to get their head around. And as challenging for young people sitting in chairs saying, well, when's it going to be my turn to have my say?
Speaking of having a say, I've got a question here. As an in-law coming into the family business, what rights do I have to be part of the conversation? Where is my place?
I think that needs to be led by those who are the incumbents. The family need to understand that there's a respectfulness that's required. So it's saying, well, as mum and dad, we didn't choose who our children fell in love with. However, we do have a responsibility. If we want to have relationships with those people who will be in our families, then we need to understand that we need to have platforms to allow them to contribute to the extent that they wish to. And also, I think what's important is that we're understanding that the decisions we're making are actually impacting those people. So to shut the door on them and say, well, you sit out there and we'll make these decisions in isolation, is actually not understanding what's going on for those people. And they've come into this family. We're all feeling safe in our families, but they're the least safe people in that forum. So I think we need to be very mindful of how important that is and be respectful.
And if you shut the door on them, you miss out on what your surprise learning was, which was my kids stepped up and their partners stepped up and they became an integral and important part of your business because they were part of the process.
They can also be, in-laws can also be such a gift because they have the benefit of a different upbringing to our own family. So sometimes just seeing something again through the different side of the prism, might be a totally different prism in that case, and what they can bring to breaking down barriers within a family that have all been brought up the same way can be so enlightening, and just a totally different way of communicating and totally different skills can be just so beneficial for the business itself.
So another question that's come in, where can someone go as a first step in the process to learn more about what it even is? What's the approach? What's the idea? What's the process? Where can they go as a first step?
We have a website with lots of information on it. But it's also listening to podcasts, it's taking advantage of off-farm training so that we can actually immerse ourselves in some of these business management aspects that maybe we haven't spent very much time on. So I think it's a bit of an education process to start with.
And not being afraid to have the conversation within your own family. And it won't always be a positive experience when you're having that conversation, but it will always be relevant. So sometimes we have to have the hard conversation to even get over the initial milestone of understanding what succession is. So
this is a nice question to end on, because we will run out of time without getting through all the questions. It says, I'm only young. What are some of the skills that I should look to develop that would help me in my family business?
I would say knowing and understanding ourselves is actually number one.
as people.
So that's self-work, understanding ourselves. Understanding ourselves then allows us to understand others better. And that's key.
What's a tangible step that someone can take to understand themselves? Is it learning to communicate? Is it
doing communication courses, going to personal development, professional development, all of that, valuing that and stepping right into it.
And what about the business planning side? Should they be thinking about courses? Should they be thinking about training? Or is it really come back to family communication makes business planning work?
Oh no, there's lots, it's both, yes. There's support out there for people who want to learn more about business planning, and there are business coaches, and I think it's being open to getting some of the IP from other people and taking that in and then using it and applying it. Of course, the only difference we ever can make is when we actually apply something we've learned. So you can have a whole bunch of stuff swirling around in your head, but until you do something, you don't change anything.
It can also be perhaps the attitude that learning is lifelong. So yes, I'm young now. Yes, I'm coming into the business. I'm going to focus on my communication skills, understanding myself.
Being a learner, not a knower,
Yeah,
I think is very helpful in understanding how you can add value.
I've learned a lot today, and I'm so grateful that you've taken the time to join us on this webinar series. Jess and Isobel, you come with so many years of experience leading Australia in the succession planning process. Everyone online will have learned a lot, and this will be essentially a time capsule for people to look back over and obviously to go and get more resources from your website. So thank you so much. For those watching online, thank you for your time and your attendance. We will endeavour to answer the rest of the questions in a follow-up email to you all, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar, where we're going to unpack more of these issues, and we're actually going to dive into family communication with Lynn Sykes, and that'll be next week. We look forward to seeing you there.